Picture this situation. A pastor plants a church. He helps them find a place to meet. He teaches them everything he can, and he helps nurture their faith. He helps see them grow. He starts to see leaders emerge even, and life is good. But then fast forward a few years, that pastor is separated from his church. He can't speak to them the way that he normally would. He can't encourage them face to face. He's isolated and he's at a distance. But his heart is still the same. He still wants to know that they're working out the things that God has worked into their lives. That's where we find Paul in Philippians 2:19-30. Paul's stuck. He's not going anywhere and he doesn't know what's going to happen next. He's used to the busy life. He's used to traveling. He's used to connecting with people. He's used to speaking to large numbers in busy rooms. But recently, all of that has come to an absolute grinding halt. Does that sound familiar? Fortunately, Paul's not alone. He has two sidekicks hanging around. One of them's named Timothy, and the other one is named Epaphroditus. These two leaders share Paul's heart for the church, so he trusted them. Now, Timothy, he was a young man at the time, but he had character. Paul said to the church in Philippi, "You know Timothy has proven himself." Our culture loves shortcuts. We love ways to get to the top as fast as possible, but Tim took the right path. He worked hard. He learned from his mentors. He put himself in a place of accountability that earned respect. It's a rare thing, honestly, to find someone who, in the Bible, it says, who cares about your welfare. That's verse 20. Most people only care for themselves. That's verse 21. But Timothy, he was unique. Even though the world around him, everything around him was totally self-centered. They were looking out for number one. They were getting what they could get their hands on. While that was happening, Timothy stepped up. He served others by meeting their greatest need, their need for Jesus. Epaphroditus, he was from Philippi. He was from the church plant. He came to Paul as a messenger. He brought them money. He brought them financial support for the ministry. And he stayed there for a while to help out. But at some point, Epaphroditus, he started to not feel so good. He got sick. He got ill. And it got so bad that at one point they almost lost him. Now, as you can imagine, that caused a little bit of a stir back home when they heard he was ill in verse 26. So the church got anxious, and Epaphroditus got anxious because the church was anxious for him, and Paul got anxious because everybody else was anxious in the whole situation. And honestly, who knew that such a little illness could cause so much stress? It's in the middle of that context that Paul decides to write a letter to the Philippians. He responds to his unfortunate circumstances, his new normal, by thinking outside of the box. Since he couldn't be there in person, and because you can't get Zoom in a Roman prison, Paul made a 3-part plan. Step 1, write a letter. Okay? Get the communication going. Get in touch. Step 2, send Epaphroditus back home. It does a whole lot when we can see our loved ones are safe and they're okay. I bet that church celebrated quite a bit in that moment. And then step 3, send Timothy. Once Paul knew what was happening with his own situation, he totally felt comfortable sending in the young gun. If Paul couldn't be there in person, Timothy was the next best thing. He was there to step in, and he shared the heart, the same heart that Paul had to help people with their struggles. And that was the plan. That was the whole entire plan. But Paul makes one important clarification to this whole thing. It's so important too. It always depends on God. Paul hoped to send Timothy. Paul hoped to hear good news back. Paul hoped to get out of prison, but God's plan takes priority. Everything from verse 19 to verse 30 is preempted by one tiny, tiny little statement. And that statement is this: if the Lord is willing. Keep that one in your back pocket, honestly. When you make plans, whatever they may be, don't hold on to them with a death grip. Instead, keep them, but keep them gently. If God is willing, they're going to succeed. And if he has other things in mind, I'd go with God. So what can we learn from a pastor who's in isolation, separated from their church? What can we get from a young person who is stepping up in a time that is totally, totally selfish? And what about the sick and the dying? Can we learn anything from them? People might tell you the Bible isn't relevant, but I am not one of those people. A few days ago, I read this story about an Italian priest. His name is Don Giuseppe. He tested positive for COVID-19, and at 72 years old, things didn't look so good. So his church bought him a respirator. But that was their plan. And Don Giuseppe, he had something else. He heard it from somewhere else. He gave up that respirator, hoping he could save someone else, someone younger than himself. And Don Giuseppe, he finished his race. And he finished it well. He sprinted. In his last hours, he sprinted towards that finish line. And like Epaphroditus, and what it says here in this book, he deserves honor for risking his life for the work of Christ. Uncertainty, anxiety, suffering, they're no match for our hope. You might be hoping for good news. You might be hoping that somebody comes home. And God cares about those things. But we have a hope that is so much bigger. The Bible points to a vision of hope that's so much bigger. Henry Nouwen said this: hope makes it possible to look beyond the fulfillment of urgent wishes and pressing desires, and offers a vision beyond human suffering and even death. Paul reminds us that in the middle of any circumstance, even the one we're facing today, we can continue to hope in Christ.